Systems nominal. Yeah, everything looks good here. So where do we want to start?
You better roll them dice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you need a wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll them dice. You better roll them dice. You never know if it could change your life.
Actually, tell me about your game or games this week, Matt. What's going on?
Oh yeah, sure. So, sometimes you have to know when to end games. I think, like last week, players were. I have a game with 3 players. They were in a 3-way, good, bad, and the ugly Mexican standoff with each other on whether to execute or imprison or pay off a neutral war-forged assassin that had just tried to kill them. It was about to come to blows, and so I was just like, let's stop. This is a good cliffhanger, and then I can, to avoid or hopefully curtail some inter-party conflict, I can, at the beginning of the next session, remind players, hey, all right, so you're in the middle of space. You need to come to some kind of solution here. Use your words. Not your blasters.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I had a couple sessions with my current group where usually they're pretty amenable, but if on certain topics they can become quite disagreeable. And I have had to just call the game. And they will continue on arguing. They'll continue arguing for hours after I've already gone home, and that was is always the right decision. Just letting them know that we're not going to resolve it this week, right? You say, look, it's over. Everyone cool off, and hopefully by the time that you come back, the following week, you can have some sort of measured resolution to the issue, depending on how intense it is.
Just ending the game is one of those tools that is in our Dungeon Master toolbox that we sometimes forget about, right?
Right.
You can just say, okay, whether it's 30 minutes early or 30 minutes late, you can say, we're done for tonight,
Yeah, it's exactly
the decision they come to next week will probably be more reasonable than let's all kill each other.
That's exactly right. And we're all adults and we have schedules, and there's only so much you can do. But one thing, one rookie mistake that I see a lot is GMs trying to go exactly 3 hours, or exactly 2 hours, exactly 4 hours every single time. But you can end 30 minutes early, or you can run 30 minutes long. Not just to avoid having everybody fighting with each other, but also to end at a proper thematic moment, or a cliffhanger, or a right before a significant confrontation, and you should feel empowered to do that. Yeah,
you're not the 22-minute CBS 2.5 min sitcom that has to run the exact amount of time.
Exactly right. Yeah,
every week. Your Game of Thrones, an episode can be an hour and 7 minutes.
Fuck you. This episode is an hour and a half, and you're gonna like it. Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
In fact, we love it.
Yeah.
Give us more.
This other episode's
random episode
57
times.
Minutes long, because that's how many minutes we decided to put into it. And you know what? It works for Game of Thrones, and it can work for you.
Yeah. So other than a player shot another player in the foot as a warning. Which was a little extreme, and a great time to call it quits for the week. Well, we'll see if they can talk it out. And if they all decide to kill each other, well, that will be a very short campaign.
It will.
But one they will never forget.
Yeah.
And I have the benefit of these players their friendships in real life go beyond this game, so I don't have to worry about anything like that.
It's funny, sometimes those seem to be more intense. My game with the hour-long arguments is all real-life friends, too, and they can get really heated. It's kind of entertaining. My games are going just fine. I did want to get your input on something about large games, right? So
large games, yeah.
My in-person campaign has 8 players, and I have that many players because
shit.
In the past, I have had trouble getting a full group, right? So I had enough people who were interested and who had played in my other campaigns, and I thought, well, all of these people can be part of the campaign, and surely maybe 1 week out of 4, everybody will show up. And everybody
I've
has
never had a
been
player
showing
named
up.
Shirley, but
boo. Everybody has been showing up, and it's mostly okay. And the thing is, if we were still playing Pathfinder, there's no way this would ever work. But because it's 5th edition, it mostly works. But I have been running into some problems. I had a player approach me and let me know that the game was dragging, and they were still having fun, but they wanted to talk to me about making some changes, and I did. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on games of this size.
There's no way around it. Like, once you, I think, crest the number 6 and are on the downside of that, it's just really hard. Your players have to know that if there's 7 or 8 or 9 or something crazy like that, then they're going to have to take a back seat, a larger percentage of the game time.
Right.
My solution for running 8-player games has usually been copious amounts of alcohol for everyone.
Yeah, it does help that we run a loose game and people can drink or smoke. This is Oregon. But there's no good answer, and ideally the answer is to not let more than 6 people into your games. But nobody wants to be excluded, and especially with 5th edition, it is absolutely possible to run a game of this size. It just does present some interesting challenges. So one thing I have done is I have insisted that everybody know exactly what they're going to do when their turn comes up. You have 10 seconds to start your action, or I skip you. So far, I haven't had to skip anybody. Just the threat of it has gotten people to take their decision-making more seriously. But another interesting thing has happened, and that is the role-play and decision-making process has become extremely arduous. And so because there's 8 people giving input and clashing personalities when they're deciding on a course of action, sometimes it can take a truly really exceptionally long amount of time to come to a solution. And I am going to, I think, insist, especially in combat or high intensity situations, that they have a limited amount of time to make decisions. But I do hate to do that. I would prefer that they reach an organic solution, but it is starting to drag the game down.
Well, that's one of those things about the having a larger party size is the deliberation becomes part of the game, and deliberation is fun to a certain extent.
Exactly. And this is so funny because some players in the group really love the deliberation. In fact, I think for some it is their very favorite part. They love the planning, they love the arguing, they love the coming down to what are all of our options, let's catalog them, let's make a chart. And there are other players who are absolutely in the let's kick down the door and just see what happens camp. And the truth is I'm in the latter camp when I play and when I run games, but I want to be accommodating to everybody, and I do like to see players deliberate. It is fun. This is the thing with your scenario that you set up. That's how you know you've done a good job as a DM, when your players are having passionate, animated arguments about making a decision in the game. That is one of the most, to me, rewarding moments as a DM.
When I built my groups out to such a large number, and I think this is a useful logistical tool for any adult group that has problems scheduling, is decide beforehand and really stick to a quorum number for your group. If we have 6 players, if 4 of them can make it, then we're going to play. If we only have 3 people, then we're not.
I do this
and don't play favorites.
Yeah, I do this with our group with the game that we run. Yeah. We have 6 total, right? Total players. But yeah. I've explicitly said, and I explicitly said at the beginning, if we have 3, we will run. And I have been pretty good, not ironclad about that, and it creates a sense of goodwill, and everybody knows how the game works, and nobody's feelings are hurt if they miss a session. And I think that can be part of your session 0, especially, and it's not something we mentioned in our pod about that, but especially with adults who have conflicts, you'll say, look, as long as we have this many people, we're going to run the game.
And here's an interesting thought that I have done once, and I wonder if you would consider it for your 8-person party, is to do a special week or weekend. It's a ton of more work for you, where you actually split the group into 2 parties of 4. And that's always hard because inevitably there's like a more popular group or that everyone wants to be in.
I have thought about that, and I have had players broach the subject or something like that. There were going to be a couple weeks where everyone was out for the holidays, and the people who were left behind said, "Oh, can we do like a little side adventure?" And it didn't work out. I don't think I had time, or the scheduling didn't work. But I think that would have been okay. And I definitely am open to it. It is. I think the main obstacle is it's extra work for the DM. But it's a good idea, especially if your players can be trusted. Not to like have like a clique or something and be weird about it. But yeah, that is a good idea. If you're willing to do the work and run 2 sessions, that can be really fun. Especially if you can. Now that you mentioned it, I'm thinking about it. You can set up a totally unique type of adventure where it's like I'm trying to think of like a relevant TV episode where 2 things are happening in parallel, and
you got your A plot and your
A plot and B plot, which can be a lot of fun. So that's one way that maybe that a larger group opens up opportunities, but it's challenging to do right.
When I started my most recent campaign, I had 10 people express interest. And of those 10, 8 wanted to play. And 8 is, again, at that very limit of, do we try and divide into 2 groups or run together? And we went with the divide into 2 groups. So I have, in the same campaign setting, happening at the same time, 2 different campaigns running. And, of course, it's a lot more work for me. But no one really has that problem of too many people. What's interesting is if another person has a baby or something like that and has to drop out, then we're back down to the size where they could merge back together. I could see that happening in the future where the 2 parties join forces to combat this larger plot that they're both dealing with.
Mm-hmm. Just as an aside to our listeners, 4 to 6 is absolutely the ideal number, and anything you can do, including splitting your party into 2 to keep that number, I think really does make a difference, but sometimes that's not always possible. So I'll let you know how it goes. Again, it's not really a problem. It's surprising to me because, like I said, I let this many people into the group because I did not think they were all going to come every week, and everybody has been very consistent about coming. So it's presented some interesting challenges, but it's a good problem to have.
Now they often call me Speedo, but my real name is Mister. Now they often call me Speedo, but my real name is Mister. No, for me to brand fellas and taking other folks' girl. Well, now they often call me Speedo, cause I don't believe in wasting time.
Okay, so let's get to the meat of our discussion, Matt. Let's talk about Faerun and Eberron and Forgotten Realms and what makes a good campaign setting. Do you want to take it away? Why don't you take it away?
Yeah, so a little bit of context about the 2 is that Faerun, or a.k.a. the Forgotten Realms, and Eberron are campaign settings for Dungeons & Dragons. So that means they're books that sometimes come with a little bit of rules, a little bit of options, but mostly describe the fantasy world that you can set your games in. So details about NPCs, villains, gods, geography, conflicts and story hooks, gazetteers, and lots of maybe pre-written adventures set in those things. One of these, Faerun, is very old, dating back to 2nd edition. It's by the venerable fantasy writer Ed Greenwood. The other Eberron is very recent. It only dates back to 3rd or even 3.5 edition. So sometime in the mid 2000s.
I think it was 2004, but don't quote me. Yeah.
So why we wanted to talk about these two is right now, Forgotten Realms, Faerun, is the campaign setting that the publications of the newest edition, 5th edition, have been leaning heavily on. Every single one of their pre-written adventures has taken place in this world. Plus, they've released 2 Player's Guide, Elemental Evil and I think Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, that have more details on this world. Even Curse of Strahd, which is nominally a Ravenloft game, begins, I think, in Baldur's Gate.
On the Sword Coast, I think, somewhere near
on the Sword Coast.
Baldur's Gate. But yes, it starts in Faerun.
Right. So everything so far, if you're new to the game, this is the only campaign setting you've been introduced to.
That's right. So for better or for worse, this is what D&D is to most people, and there's a reason. So if you're not familiar, then a lot of recognizable figures from the D&D universe are explicitly tied to Faerun. Drizzt, oh god, Drizzt Do'Urden, Elminster, Mordenkainen, Catterley, all the
Mordenkainen's Greyhawk.
Oh, you're right. That's correct. Mordenkainen is Greyhawk. But anyway, all the others I mentioned are all Faerun. And
right, the Red Wizards of Thay.
So if you know a
Spellfire,
if you know a character from any sort of D&D novelization or popular fiction or popular representation, it's probably from Faerun. And this is good and this is bad. Most DMs have probably had a player by now who wants to be a Drizzt clone or something close to it, and that can be frustrating. But in general, Matt and I think that it's a pretty imperfect campaign setting, and we're kind of frustrated that it's all that's being offered to players.
Right. I mean, this is, I think, at least for me, my biggest complaint about 5th edition is it is extremely reluctant to fully incorporate all of the great ideas from other Dungeons and Dragons properties, or even better, to make new ones. It seems to want to stay in this very safe Forgotten Realms territory. And I think the reason we find Forgotten Realms boring is that, one, for me, the world is maybe too big. It's got almost everything somewhere, and it just feels like a grab bag of all kinds of different things, with only one consistent tone, which is that kind of high magic fantasy.
Yeah, there's too much going on, and this is a consistent problem with a lot of campaign settings, but it's for Forgotten Realms, it's especially, I think, guilty of trying to do too many things at once. It really leans into, and this is my main complaint, it leans into traditional stereotypes of how races should behave and what a generic,
right. The elves are all leaving the world, right, but just for an island off the coast, right? That's, from Lord of the Rings. I don't think that's very interesting.
No, it's
right?
not.
Oh, I have a character. He's an elf. He wants to leave.
That's right.
That's very.
He's
exciting.
Either a wood elf or a high elf. Just like in Tolkien, the dwarves all live underground, or they all like to mine. Oh, this is a major complaint of mine about 5th edition, is that there's so much of the mechanics of the game that are tied into the lore of Faerun specifically, and that's very annoying and frustrating. And it doesn't have to be that way. Like, not every rogue needs thieves' cant. Not every dwarf needs to be from the hills or the mountains. There's room for innovation there, and Forgotten Realms is trapped in a very post-Tolkien, 80s, 90s world where there's very little ideas or innovation. And if you're going to have a campaign setting with elves and dwarves and orcs and all that, which you should, if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, you will. Those are the races. People are going to want to play those races, but you should innovate. You should have, at this point, I don't think anybody needs any help, imagining a dwarf as a gruff, mining, Scottish-sounding person. So I feel like there should be room. We shouldn't be playing in that. I just don't think we should be playing in that paradigm anymore. It's the year of our Lord 2018. I think we should be doing something more interesting.
Yes, hell yes. And for me, as someone who had not played in Faerun for a while, and then when I joined my first Forgotten Realms campaign, there's just too much stuff. And unless you've read 24 really maybe subpar, some of them might be pretty good fantasy novels, knowing about the campaign setting requires you to know about so much lore. Here's one that really grinds my gears, is that deities.
Oh, right.
There are like a million different pantheons from different parts of the world, plus every race not only has their own god, but their own pantheon. Just the table of all of the Forgotten Realms gods from 3rd edition, right? So just a list with one god per line is like 5 pages long.
I do want to
5 pages.
Pages. Yeah, this is a serious problem, and the Pantheon is completely incomprehensible and also changing a lot. I do want to praise this setting for one thing, though, and that is related to gods, is that one of the ways that they have explained away edition changes has to do with great conflicts among the Pantheon. I forget what it's called when the thing that takes place right before the game Baldur's Gate, when all the gods are like forced to walk the earth as mortals or whatever. That was a pretty cool.
Oh yeah, they all get to sit down.
It was a pretty cool twist and a good way to explain why the world is radically different. But Matt's absolutely correct. There's too many. There's too many gods. There's too many races. There's too many regions, and they're all either over described or under described. There's never like the right amount to like actually work with.
If you give your players the campaign book and they have to choose a deity and they have to choose a region to be from, the chances of that one corresponding to maybe some of the ideas that you had for your campaign it just makes it so low because there's too many, right? If it was a tighter campaign setting, then the chances will be high that, oh yeah, the story of Iluvatar or Grom or Bane is very important to my campaign setting. But that also leads me, and this is a stylistic complaint as opposed to an actual legitimate criticism. I don't like campaign settings where the gods are like really active in messing with the affairs of mortals. And that has always been the style of the Forgotten Realms, right? Gods got their grubby little fingers in everything. They have their chosen champions and all this stuff. And so the game seems more about the gods themselves than about us mortals.
That's right.
Player characters.
Don't you forget about me. Don't you forget about me. Will you stand above me? Look my way, never love me. Rain keeps falling down.
And this is so with Faerun as the default, it feels like that's the way D&D is meant to be played with gods as basically Greek deities, meddling with human affairs, being recognizably human in many ways. And Matt, I agree with Matt. I don't like to play games that way anymore. I much prefer distant or mysterious or inscrutable divine beings that, and I think those are much more interesting than the just superpowered humans. Half
the gods are definitely Greek and
right.
not beyond human.
Half the not half, but a non insignificant chunk of the current pantheon in Faerun is mortals who ascended, which is neat, but also it just kind of indicates like what kind of power they wield. and like what their motivations and interests are. And it's fine. It's just not very interesting to me, and I don't think it's a particularly interesting way to run a campaign, because as Matt points out, no, you're right, Matt. It makes the game kind of about the gods. If you were just like a little cat's paw for Cyric or whatever, then that's kind of an interesting story to tell, but it's not very interesting for the players, I don't think, if they know that they're just...
I know that's a stylistic choice.
Right.
I know you can have just as interesting of a campaign where the gods are trying to mess with you. It's just not my preference. But I think there's a second tier to that, in that just as important as of the gods is Faerun is filled with too many epic level, 20th level, whatever edition you're using, 30th level NPCs.
Yes.
From Elminster and the Harpers, and like every dude who rules a shitty village in the middle of nowhere is actually a 15th level fighter, 3rd level cleric.
Right.
And you're like, wow, holy shit.
If you it really like beggars belief when there's like a really big problem, right? You got a campaign and there's, I don't know, there's dragons or gnolls or literally anything, and you know that out there somewhere is Drizzt Do'Urden with his, +5 scimitar, and he could just come in here and chop that shit up and, solve that problem for you. There's suspension of disbelief. Like you can see how there's, very powerful NPCs would be too busy to deal with these problems. But at a certain point, especially as, your challenges become, region threatening or world threatening, you start to wonder, well, where the fuck is Elminster? Where is Drizzt? And a lot of games and modules address this by having them show up. But it's always, to me, it was always unsatisfying, because it said, well, why, it felt to me like, why aren't you dealing with this? Like, what you'll never be as badass as Drizzt or as Elminster, and that's limiting. I feel like I don't like the campaign to run that way, and I do like having a few powerful NPCs, but I also like them to be limited. I like them to be retired. Elminster and Drizzt are not retired. They're active adventurers. There are tons of these. There are books and books and books and books and books about all these active adventuring parties who are 15th to 20th level, and it makes you wonder, where are these people during when you're doing Storm King's Thunder or Lost Mines of Phandelver? Like, why aren't they dealing with this?
Right. I don't like the NPCs that are too powerful for the players to fuck with.
Right.
And a clever DM might have an interesting campaign idea. Like, I would love to run a campaign called Elminster Must Die, where the players are all evil or maybe just good, and they just fucking hate Elminster, and they have to go and kill him and his wise ass quips and fucking ever smoking pipe. But that would be fun.
But in general,
my campaign is too packed.
Yeah.
Is there anything you really like about Forgotten Realms?
I mean, so the reason why that it works, and why it's not like at all hard to understand why Wizards favors this setting. Why Wizards favors this setting? It's because it's low impact, right? It doesn't require any investment on the part of the players, and so what's good is it's kind of like plug and play. You tell a player that there's an elf, and in their mind they're picturing the right kind of elf. You tell a player that there's a gnome, and they're picturing the right kind of gnome. And to me, I don't like this. I want to challenge my players. I want to run interesting campaigns. I want to explore new ideas, but it is extremely easy for newcomers to the genre and to the game to get on board with Forgotten Realms. Now, I think that it treats them as if they're not as intelligent as they are, and I think that we can do better. But I will acknowledge that this is a strength of the setting.
Right. You've got a ton of tie-in potential. Lords of Waterdeep, the board game, Neverwinter Nights, Baldur's Gate, 1 and 2, Myth Draenor. There's all these video games and board games that tie into the Forgotten Realms. And of course, the novels, right? The R.A. Salvatore and Ed Greenwood himself.
Right.
And I think in an older era of D&D, the people who publish it, Wizards of the Coast, might assume that all their players have read these things.
Right, or are familiar with it. And that does make it accessible. And I see that. And so there are things that I do like, small bits.
Little bit.
That I do like about the Faerun campaign setting. I think that regions like
okay, 1, 2, 3. Say your favorite place in Faerun.
Oh, actually,
3, 2, 1.
Luskan.
Waterdeep.
Waterdeep is a great choice. I think Luskan is a really interesting city.
No, Luskan's cool too.
But I mean, there's nothing wrong with a pirate city. But yeah, Waterdeep. Matt's absolutely correct. Waterdeep is probably the best and most interesting part of Faerun. And so if you limit your scope, it can be a good campaign setting, especially if you let yourself do a little bit of creative world building of your own based on your understanding of the setting. But the larger it gets, the bigger the scope is, just the less it works. There are certain individual things that I like. I like the Harpers. I like the Red Wizards of Thay. I like some of the interactions between these different factions. But again, the broader that it gets, the more that it falls apart, the more that it becomes sort of like just a generic wash of a campaign setting. So let's talk about a campaign. Sorry, go ahead.
The default area for you to put new characters, like the Dale lands, like that's the most boring shit. It reminds me of the boring place, those awful Wheel of Time.
Oh yes, it's very Wheel of Time.
Books started. I'm like, oh yeah, the characters come from the most boring place where nothing ever happens. That's right. And then they have some low level adventures, and they get
even the Sword Coast, which is supposed to be very exciting, lots of conflict. There's just not that much that's interesting there. There's Baldur's Gate. There's Candlekeep. There's some. It's just not that interesting, and that's one of the more dynamic areas of the whole campaign.
Love and happiness. But wait a minute, something's going wrong. Someone's on the phone, 3 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, talking about how she can make it right, yeah. Happiness is when you really feel good about somebody. There's nothing wrong being in love with someone, yeah. Oh, baby, love and happiness. Love and happiness. Oh.
So let's talk about something that we do like. Matt, do you want to lead off on this one?
Yeah, so Wizards of the Coast did a really exciting thing when 3.5 edition came out. Is they announced a worldwide contest for amateurs and people who had published game settings alike, I think. Or maybe it was just amateurs.
I'm not sure. I don't remember the rules of the contest, but yeah.
To enter a contest to have their homebrew campaign setting published by Wizards of the Coast for Dungeons & Dragons. And they set some pretty, in some ways loose, in some ways tight parameters. And there was a huge contest. It was narrowed down to 100 and then 3. And then, while we have never been able to see any of the other entrants to this contest, the winner, by Keith Baker, who's designed a lot of great board games and his own role-playing games as well, was a campaign setting called Eberron.
And Eberron is terrific for a lot of reasons. It's very interesting. And the thing about Eberron is that it's an impossible standard to live up to, because Keith Baker has been working on it, or had been working on it before he submitted it, for years or decades or something. A long time. A great deal of work went into creating this campaign setting. So if you're ever hoping to replicate the wild success of Eberron, you have to start now and hope that it'll pan out a decade later. But it's terrific for a lot of reasons, and we'll go over what we like. But and we have talked about this in our previous world building podcast, but what it does is it asks, what would the world be like if there really were D&D style Vancian casting and there were wizards and sorcerers and artificers running around. Like, what would be different? What kind of campaign setting would look like? And what you get is Eberron.
Yeah, the conclusion that Keith Baker came to is you had basically a maybe early modern, like in some ways late Renaissance, in some ways early industrial campaign setting with magic replacing technology, and not like a Final Fantasy style magitech,
right?
Just actual magic, in place of technology. So there are no firearms or steam engines or anything like that, but there are magical conveyances using bound elementals and repeating wands that might replace guns. And Keith Baker sells us this campaign setting that is very pulp, Indiana Jones, noir, think the Maltese Falcon style game, kind of like much noir set in the decades after a Great War, right after World War I.
And yeah, so this is what separates Eberron and what we think all good campaign settings, including ones like Valorane or Ravenloft. Is it starts with a thematic idea or a question that it wants to answer or wants to explore. Faerun does not, and I think this is its major failing. Faerun just sort of like assumes a set of stereotypes about fantasy and fantasy races and just sort of builds out from there. Eberron,
right? If we assume a frictionless pulley, if we assume a spherical cow,
if we assume
you have a can opener,
assume that dwarves are Scottish, assume that elves want to sail into the west.
Why?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. There's no answer. Yeah. Right. It's not to tell any particular type of story.
But right, so Eberron says, what if we had all this magic and the world continued to grow and expand and people got better? What would it look like? Ravenloft asks, what would an extended gothic horror setting look like?
And the same reason that Eberron built on this like strong theme of magic as technology is the same reason that Dark Sun works. Like, what if magic destroyed the world?
Right. Or why Valorane works. Like, what if Arthurian fantasy, but Dungeons and Dragons? It's a simple concept, but it is already in and of itself stronger than Faerun because it's actually asking a question. It's trying to explore an idea.
And now this is a fine line to walk with a game like Dungeons and Dragons. And one of the things I see from a lot of homebrew is that they explore a single theme or question to the exclusion of everything else, right? There's only one problem or one thing that's happening, and they have to do it. And Eberron is Dungeons and Dragons, and this is said very explicitly at the beginning. If it's in Dungeons and Dragons, right, it's in Eberron. And so while it still explores that theme, there's still room for psionics and wizards and elves and dwarves and all the things that your players are familiar with, right? Whereas some homebrew is like, oh, well, it's just this one thing that's going on. There's one type of magic.
Right. And Eberron is great about this. Eberron is so good because it really addresses all of the things that are important about Dungeons and Dragons and puts just like a little twist on them. So
delicious spin.
That's right. So there's dragons, but they're aloof and intelligent and serve these, great, world-defining creation dragons. And there are elves, but they graft dead body parts onto themselves and live forever. And there are, everything has.
There are dwarves, but they're basically they lend out money,
right?
And their religion allows them to charge for usury.
Generally, there's like everything is familiar, but with like a little twist. And so anything that you sort of can do in Dungeons and Dragons, you can do in Eberron, but you have to make, slight adjustments. And I pitched this setting to my completely new players, and they had, ran into some issues, but generally they caught on pretty quickly that it was a familiar but a unique world, and that there were just like a few things that were going to have to be tweaked. And that is what works so well with this campaign setting for Dungeons and Dragons.
It's that fine line between something new and a strong theme and still being this same game, right? Because you can do a campaign setting that is something else completely, but unless you have like a selection of species or races and classes, it's not quite Dungeons and Dragons.
That's right. And so when you're listening to us talk about our complaints about what we think is a good campaign setting, bear in mind that this is all within the context, for us, this conversation, specifically Dungeons and Dragons. But you may want to expand beyond that. If there are questions that you may want to explore or themes that you want to highlight that will not work with Dungeons and Dragons. If you want to have a game with no elves and no dwarves and no orcs and gnomes, you can do that in Dungeons and Dragons, but maybe it's not the best setting. And if you want to explore, an interesting mix of steampunk technology, where there are functional guns or Tesla coils or whatever, that may not be the best fit for Dungeons and Dragons either, though maybe, kind of depends. But it just think about if you're thinking about what you want to explore and what the question that you want to ask is, there's a chance you can do it with Dungeons and Dragons. It's a very flexible setting, and that is why, even though there are some I think that Matt and I would prefer better, and there are a lot of problems with Dungeons and Dragons and even 5th edition, but we still stick with it because it is so flexible and easy to work within.
Another thing that makes Eberron great, and I think this is actually double highlights of failing of Forgotten Realms, is that it creates interesting thematic geographic places that don't just correspond to fantasy, medieval, real-world place. And this is a huge problem in Forgotten Realms. Like, there's fantasy Arabia, there's fantasy China, there's fantasy, in a really terrible presentation, Africa.
Yeah.
Eberron has a bunch of fantasy places and nations. The 5 nations are central to the game, but they don't, map directly onto any real-world places. Though,
right.
You could maybe see they're Russian themes. Yeah,
they're recognizably...
but it's not that... It's not that strong, and it's refreshing.
They're recognizably European-ish. But really, but they're unique in enough ways that they don't map directly onto something, which is a huge failing of most fantasy novels and campaign settings. Period. It is something that I don't think that most writers are able to get away from. The plague of this is fantasy France or fantasy Hungary or fantasy Germany is or fantasy England most often is a genre defining trait. It is something that it is impossible to get away from even in good fiction. So this is what is especially cool about Eberron. And the further you get out, the more unrecognizable and unique things become. Like we mentioned, the elves have an island and they're deathless and they have a completely unrecognizable culture of, revering, dead ancestors. And there's a lost continent where there are drow, but the drow worship a scorpion god and have alchemy, and
there's giants,
and there used to be a giant civilization of powerful and brilliant giant wizards. It's
and that brings us to the factions and organizations in Eberron, which I think might actually be the strongest defining thing. Mm-hmm. So first off, you have your typical nations, and they have wants and rulers and things like that. But in addition, there are dragon marks, so they're like magical tattoos that correspond to different bloodlines. They give people magical powers and an edge in certain areas of commerce and business. So there are 12 giant magical corporations whose influence is as powerful as the nations themselves.
And this is, so we talked about this with Valorant, this is the little twist, the little mechanical twist that makes the game a little bit interesting, that adds a little bit of variety. In Valorant, it was the wild magic. In Eberron, it's the dragon marks. And you don't have to have one. Nobody in your party may have one, but it adds, a mechanical change to the world that you're forced to play around or address. And it's a very interesting idea that makes for great campaigns and for great hooks. And this is what's, I think, best about Eberron. And this has to do with the factions, this has to do with the regions, this has to do with the history and the items, is that there are so many good campaign and adventure hooks in Eberron, just littered throughout the lore.
Right, in Forgotten Realms, you really have to work to solve the problems because the system seems already solved.
Exactly.
The equation has been
Faerun is very static, it feels like, right? It does, like, there are conflicts brewing-ish, but nothing, like, important. But Eberron, it's after the Great War. Everybody's trying to, find their place. Conflicts are brewing between nations, that didn't get what they wanted out of the war. There's an entire missing country. There's threats, nebulous threats like the Lord of Blades and the Blood of Vol. It's just so easy. I've never had so much fun and had so much ease just dropping hints for my players to investigate.
Variety.
Yes, and the variety, yes.
Speaking of threats, right? You've got interdimensional psychic beings that are going to drive everyone mad and take over our reality and are actually doing pretty well. They've already knocked down 1 continent out of 4. And their agents are sort of at low levels in throughout the world. That this is the dreaming dark.
That's right.
But there's also like mundane threats, right? I had a great campaign arc where the players were fighting the agents of the Aurum, which is basically like the Illuminati or
mine too.
Just a bunch of rich people.
My players have had equally challenging, and interesting arcs with both the Kurai, the Dreaming Dark and the interdimensional beings, and just a bunch of rich jerks who want to control the trade of material from one nation to another. There's just so much variety for different types of stories to be told in Eberron. And it feels like...
Right.
So
in Forgotten Realms, it feels like the story's got to be like an evil god or an evil monster wants to take over the world.
Evil cleric, right? Or, a cruel lord. It's
a lich.
A lich. Almost always a lich. And we're ragging on Forgotten Realms pretty hard, and it is fun, but this is what's so exciting about Eberron and about other, like, well-built campaign settings, is that it makes it easy and fun to tell different types of stories.
Right. And I think, mechanically, right, we talked about these mechanical twists without changing anything in the core rules. Eberron has basically, throughout the campaign, saying scary NPCs aren't going to be 25th level and chosen by the gods and immortal, right? They'll probably be 8th through 12th level, right? Typical NPCs will be 3rd or 4th, and they probably won't even have character classes, right? They'll just be warriors or mage rights, which is something new that's added, or adepts.
And there are a lot of, and this is interesting, there are a lot of powerful nobility and dragon mark heirs and important people, but almost all of these important people have some, or like a considerable level of NPC classes. So they may be level 5 fighters, or level 3 commoner, or level 3 noble, or something like that, which makes them powerful and interesting, but they're not optimized adventurers. And very powerful, 10th and above characters are very rare.
Right, which makes your adventurers much more special.
Right. And there are plenty of adventurers, and this is one of the things that Eberron does delightfully, is that they acknowledge the existence of adventurer as a career and a class. And there are, in Sharn, for example, there are multiple adventuring guilds which you can join and work with,
of various degrees of
repute. But it makes
straight up grave robbers, enforcers for the mob, or maybe they've got a nice
or maybe they're just plunging into the jungles of Zendrik. But it acknowledges the existence of adventurers, and it makes it easy to understand why, there's maybe somebody more powerful than you, but they're not there to solve the problem because they got a contract to do something better, because because they're elsewhere, or because, they're not substantially more powerful than you, they're just a little bit more powerful.
Right. And whereas in the Forgotten Realms, you have a 15th level paladin ruling the city of Neverwinter.
Right.
Like, why don't you go fucking kill this lich?
Exactly.
You could do that.
Why don't you do this yourself? Exactly.
Jesus.
Yeah.
And so speaking of the other things, I can't believe we haven't even got to this. And I think this is one of the things that is that proves that people love Eberron and they want it more than anything is in all the like character D&D fan art and things like that, and homebrew. The things that the new mechanical things that were introduced in Eberron. Eberron not only introduces dragon marks, which are for all the standard races, but it also introduces new races, shifters, like half werewolf people, changelings, half doppelganger people who can shape shift like Odo from Deep Space Nine, and lastly, Warforged, which are magical robots that have full sentience. And I see tons of Warforged art, and then the new class, the Artificer, I've seen a million different attempts to bring that to 5th edition, including the official ones by Wizards of the Coast, because people love this class. You're a magical hacker.
It's a terrific class. It's a terrific idea, and I know why they haven't released it yet. I'm sure it's hard to get right, but it is one of the more necessary, I think, oversights, or one of the more necessary classes and an oversight. In a high magic world, you're going to have somebody who works with magic items, somebody who makes them, somebody who tinkers with them, somebody who can manipulate them. And the Artificer in the Eberron setting is just so perfect. I love it so much. It is such a good, interesting class. It was, if you had system mastery, very overpowered potentially, but it is such a fun class and a good idea. And Matt's absolutely right. There's in terms of new mechanics, it's very small, but the new races, the new classes, and the new mechanics that are introduced do a ton of heavy lifting. The Warforged are a critical part of the setting and a very good, interesting, well-balanced race. It is just, if you can, and it's actually pretty easy to now, pick up a used copy of the Eberron campaign setting. It's not in print anymore, I don't think. Actually, I shouldn't say that because I don't know, but I'm pretty sure it's not.
It's not.
Pick up the 3.5 one, maybe the 4th edition one if you can find it. I haven't actually spent much time with that one, and
it's a less good version of the 3rd edition.
But it's just such a rich document. It is fun to read. It is just brilliantly well done. It's a great place to get ideas for theme. And one of the things that it does,
I would also recommend the other book in the setting by the original author Keith Baker, which is Sharn's City of Towers, and it's a guide to the main city of Eberron, which is a cool giant
another terrific book. So on the first page, and I love this so much, and this is informed almost everything I've done as a DM and as a creator. The first page that's not credits or copyright stuff is an introduction, and the first subheading is the tone of Eberron, and then beneath that is movies to inspire you. And I love this so much. It is I think so important, and I think that Keith Baker recognizes that, and that's why he put it first. Is it establishes tone, and it guides you to, this is how I want you to be thinking about, these are the stories I want you to be thinking about when you're playing this campaign setting, when you're playing this game.
Let's bring it back. Bitch, this versus your obituary. Hit you very hard till you twitch like Klitschko split you. Get you worried. Shoot that piece of shit. 8-inch blade cut you. Flinch, wanna cut you. Head butt you in a clinch. Sharp backs up your cardiovascular. Spill your plasma. Smooth like a jazz player. Blast slayer. You dearly departed in a casket full of bullets after I blasted your head. Leave you with a raspberry beret. Massacred found in a barn in Nebraska. Cold like Alaska. Legend like Sasquatch. The definition of masculine and mass killing. Dusted like Joplin. Dropping masculine. Strychnine. Rat killer. Pest control. Kill you like cholesterol, rap and dap from the best of all time. Celebrate a festival of crime, digestible fresh. If you test, I'll pull the 9. New York City, slumming in the city. Packing my cat,
so a couple of caveats and maybe there are some things we don't like about Eberron.
There certainly are, and there are things that we like about Faerun, but I think it's instructive to think of one of these as a stronger campaign setting and one of them as a weaker campaign setting.
Right. I would say a couple, at least some caveats for Eberron is classes like Wizard and Cleric and Fighter and Rogue work, and any sort of psionic class work really well in Eberron because it was created for 3.5 and then reissued for 4th edition and not created for 5th edition. Some of the things in 5th edition I think will fit less well.
Right.
For example, the Tiefling and Dragonborn classes, you will have to do some work as the DM to make sure that those fit in the world.
Dragonborn makes almost no sense, and I am very glad that none of my players wanted to play one. You can make it work. I had some ideas, but in the terms of the setting, it's very hard to make it make sense.
Right, because the one way we've tweaked dragons is that they are aloof scholars of the fabric
prophecy,
of the universe itself, the prophecy, and why they would have a bunch of Dragonborn running around.
It doesn't make sense.
And then the same with the Tieflings is that, all the major threats to Eberron are not exactly an invasion from hell.
Right.
So it's unclear, that sort of traditional demons want to influence the world to get souls is not played up strongly in Eberron. So Tieflings and Dragonborns I don't think work very well. Warlocks, it's such a versatile class that I think it's not a lot of work as a DM to find something in the Eberron campaign setting that could give someone powers. But at least in the 3.5, right, there's not a lot, not as much for Warlocks to do.
Right. And
I mean, I would probably port Warlock over as the Psychic and say that Kalshatar are Warlocks and maybe the Inspired of Sarlona
I have a Warlock in my campaign. And
what'd you do?
I just gave her full permission to decide on their own source of power. What I ended up doing was that they told me what they wanted, and I said, well, this sounds like maybe you draw your power from the demon that is locked in combat with the silver flame, right?
Ooh, that's so fucking good.
Yeah, so I was pretty proud of that.
Oh, the silver flame is one of the best.
The silver flame is such a good.
There's so many good things we can't even talk all about.
But so for reference, the silver flame, the idea is that there's this powerful paladin locked in combat with a Rakshasa demon, and there's this immortal conflict in the center of the cathedral. And anyway, so there's a sect that believes that the demon is in fact influencing the silver flame and that it has more power, and so anyway. So what I would do, what I'm saying here is that, if you were going to port over a warlock, just, have them describe to you where they want to get their power from and try to find a fit within the setting, which, by the way, you should do for any non-standard setting. And it's not too hard to do if you work with your players.
Is there anything else you don't like about Eberron or you wish was a little different?
Not everything is a slam dunk, and there's a lot going on in Eberron, so not all of it can be super great. I think there's too much. I actually think the Dragon Mark houses are not well defined enough, believe it or not.
Right, some of them overlap.
Some of them overlap, and in terms of their spheres of wealth and influence, they make sense. But there's no real cultural distinction. They don't have a very strong flavor among them. Some of them do, but most of them don't. And since they're supposed to be so explicitly powerful, that feels like kind of an oversight. But that's not a huge problem. It's just something that I wish there was never or was there? I don't think there was ever a book of the 12 houses, which I think was
there should have been,
which I think was an oversight.
I mean, there's stuff in the Five Nations.
Yeah,
and,
the thing is,
the magic of Eberron.
There's plenty there, and you can make it work. But given how important they are to the setting,
right? Some of them work so well. House Cannith is a
House
great
ally,
is so, and Venice.
Yes, I have used it as both. It is so easy to make sense of that. But others less so good. Yeah.
For me, the couple things that don't work is the Silver Flame, the Blood of Vol. These two religions are super interesting.
Right.
The standard pantheon of the Sovereign Horse is just a little boring, and I've had trouble using it engagingly, and the evil gods don't actually seem that interesting.
This is a great point, and maybe the number one complaint that I have. The standard pantheon, the Sovereign Host, is as boring as anything in Faerun, and very difficult when compared to the Silver Flame, the Blood of Vol, the cults, the Dragon Below, any of the other religions that are in there. It just doesn't have much to work with, and it's
right.
Yeah.
And I can maybe see the idea of the average person who's not a Silver Flame fanatic or a Blood of Vol cultist or something, religion maybe isn't that important in their life or whatever it is, they pray to the sovereign host, but it ends up being kind of boring from a storytelling perspective. Like, I don't think I've ever had a villain or a really interesting ally. I've had plenty of NPCs who are clerics or just regular priests of the sovereign host, but
it's
not my favorite.
I've used the Mockery and the Traveler, here and there, and that they're kind of interesting, but compared to the alternatives, compared to the Silver Flame, compared to the Blood of Vol, especially when we're talking villains, compared to the cults of the Dragon below, why would you go with the standard pantheon?
I guess my other complaint is just some of the standard races are much more interesting than normal. I think half-orcs are super interesting in that orcs are no longer marauding hordes, but instead druidic shamans who live in the woods. I think elves, as you mentioned before, with either weird undead flesh grafts or sort of
martial,
fanatical, like martial people, or just blended into regular cosmopolitan society, which is also super interesting, are great. Halflings in their kind of like barbarian homeland are cool. Dwarves
are weak.
Just barely missed the mark, and I would redo dwarves.
Dwarves are very weak in Eberron. Humans don't have a strong place, which is to be expected, but compared to, say, Warforged, which are just so rich with storytelling opportunity, or Shifters, for this example.
Or Shifters.
Or any of them.
Kal-Shatar.
Kal-Shatar are super interesting if you're ever going to do any psionic stuff. Yeah, it's a limitation because it's still Dungeons & Dragons, so I had to include many of these races. But dwarves... gnomes to a lesser extent.
I think humans. I think gnomes are okay as the weird kind of schemer,
they've got their own
knowledge.
Yeah, they've got their own nation, but dwarves especially come off real weak. This is so funny.
I feel like they're just like failures. I'm like, oh man, the elves made this, the gnomes made this.
This reminds me of Golarion, where one of the designers explicitly. This is the Pathfinder campaign setting, by the way. Explicitly does not like dwarves, and dwarves were really weak in Golarion, and I'm a big dwarf fanboy. I have always loved dwarves. I think they're super interesting and great, even in their like standard setting, and so I kept bitching about this because it's just funny. But the same thing happened in Eberron. They just couldn't find a way to make that to put a twist on dwarves that wasn't they're good at lending.
And this is such a minor critique because one of the great things about Eberron is the main society actually makes sense to a lot of players. There are humans, halflings, elves, dwarves, and gnomes all living together, and as they have for centuries, right? And it's a cosmopolitan society, and your dwarf doesn't have to be from underground. Right. He can be from a tiny village or a big metropolis, and he's just a cosmopolitan dwarf, which is fine.
Yeah. Well, we are into our
really late on
second
time,
hour,
but
well into the hour and a half.
I did have one more thing,
sure,
which is to say, quick lightning round. Like, what are the favorite Dungeons or Eberron adventures that you have run or played in that are like, oh man, this is why I really love this?
I mean. All of mine that I have run are homebrew, but I have...
Well, just give us the pitch for a couple of them.
Well, I wanted to use this as an example because I think it's kind of the perfect one, but in the back of the main book, there's a short introductory adventure called The Forgotten Forge. Matt, have you played this?
So, I actually ran The Forgotten Forge when it came out, along with the next 2 or 3 adventures that followed up on it. Shadows of the Last War, and I forget what the last one was called, but that was super fun.
I don't know. I was going to say, I don't know but I love it. I think it is such a great, like a well-contained adventure. It is also such a great introduction to the setting. It establishes so many like themes and the tone, and also introduces you to concepts like the Warforged and about creation forges and the Last War and all this good stuff. So I really think it's very rare for your standard packaged introductory one-shot to be any good whatsoever. They usually have to do a lot of work of telling, but this one is so good, it's so strong. I love it. How about you, Matt?
Here's one of my favorite adventures that I've run, which is players had been dealing with a lot of like Dragon Mark things and finding like schema for ancient creations and stuff like that. They have to go into the Mournland. Mm-hmm. What they didn't know is one of their schemas in there like is a portal to an alternate universe, and they, by combining with the energies of the Mournland, they went to a parallel mirror universe where the like thing that destroyed Sire, the Morning, instead destroyed everything but Sire. And the Lord of the Blades took over, and he's a good guy in this world, keeping the undead at bay from the last bastion of life in the world. And so they had to deal with a good Lord of Blades to then go back to their own universe to try and fight the bad Lord of Blades.
That's interesting. The arc for my campaign that I was...
Got a little wacky there, but...
No, I like it. The arc for... I do think that a lot of the strongest Eberron campaigns hinge on the Mourning and the Mournland. My favorite arc that I did very well, that I think went over very well, hinged on a Siren refugee group that, was encouraged by outside forces to blame the leadership of Sharn for the destruction of destruction of Sire, and became sort of a freedom fighter / terroristy group. And the players were forced to find a way to stop them from crashing Skyway into the rest of the city. Many of the freedom fighters were sympathetic and friendly because they had lost their homeland and were suffering as refugees in the poorest parts of Sharn. And so that was...
Dispel magic can't melt
Dispel magic
steel. They wanted to do a 9/11 on Sharn.
It was gosh, there's just so many like rich stories to be told in Eberron. And
my other favorite campaign I ran, which I think you played in the introductory.
Oh, that was so good! I got to run. I wanted to mention that one. Yeah,
was Sharn superheroes. You start out as gritty players trying to bust up the Boromar gang, and the end of the campaign, it wasn't a long one. I think we did it in like 3 months. Is when you make the final bust, a beautiful human man with Dragonmark House's connections in an enchanted suit of celestial armor, giving him the flight ability, named Captain Sharn, steals your thunder, and then you find out Captain Sharn is corrupt and you have to go fight him. So it was a Sharn superheroes game.
I did play in that, and it was very fun, and it was a perfect fit for Eberron. Yeah. Okay. Any last thoughts on campaign settings?
Fucking go play Eberron.
Go pick up this book. You can get it almost anywhere online, or probably just go to your local FLGS and look around the shelves. This is one of the ones that's just pretty easy to find. I picked up mine for $5 at a sale recently, since I'd lost my original. And read it, get some ideas, and really it is the perfect campaign setting document. I don't know that you can do any better.
Wizards, give us back Eberron.
Yes, and also, because I know that you're listening to us, Wizards of the Coast, please let Keith Baker write Eberron for 5th edition. We want it so bad. Please. Okay. All right, y'all. We'll see you next week.